Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us at today's webinar. Welcome to our 5th webinar in the series under the banner One on Education. It's wonderful to see so many of you with us at this event. I'm Radhika Karthikeyan, Vice President Teacher Resources at Orient BlackSwan. We are delighted to introduce our speaker for the day, Sir David Heathfield. David Heathfield is an international storyteller, teacher trainer, and writer of educational resources. He has strong belief in the power of storytelling to bring people together and tell stories from the world's oral cultures with passion. He has been a workshop leader for teachers and storytellers from different backgrounds and with different levels of experience. He has worked with the British Council and IATEFL and has trained teachers in Nepal, Brazil, Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, Italy, Portugal, Austria, Slovakia, Turkey, Dubai, and Libya. He is the author of the teacher resource books, Storytelling with Our Students, Techniques for Telling Tales from Around the World, and Spontaneous Speaking, Drama Activities for Confidence and Fluency. He has also written many practical articles on creative teaching ideas for storytelling and drama. He loves to celebrate cultural diversity through storytelling and drama and builds bridges across the cultures and between people through this. Thank you, Mr. Heathfield, for agreeing to conduct the webinar, Live, Creative, Engaging, Intercultural, Online Storytelling. Dear participants, during the presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box in your control panel. We will bring them up during the question and answer session towards the end of the webinar in the last 15 minutes. Over to Mr. David Heathfield now.
Thank you, Radhika Karthikeyan. It's a lovely introduction. I feel very honoured to be invited by Orient BlackSwan to run this webinar, this workshop. It's very much a workshop. I'm going to ask you, even though you're large in number, to be doing some activities during it. And you can see the opening slide of my presentation here. I hope that my picture and my volume is clear enough. So, namaste. Live, creative, engaging, intercultural online storytelling. Storytelling itself is at the heart, but this is what we're talking about today. And just until a few months ago, what was normal for me as a storyteller was to be interacting with people face to face in the same physical space, breathing the same air, whether it's a classroom or a hall or in an outdoor venue, in a nature reserve or school grounds, and moving together. But that's all changed. This pandemic has made life different. I've done some storytelling before that and found it quite challenging because I had little experience before February 2020. Although I have done lots of webinars like this one before with teachers in different countries. But over the last few months, I've gained a lot of experience and I would say some knowledge about online storytelling and realized that it's not all negative. There are some positives and we'll talk about that later. So this has become the normal for me with storytelling. You can see me there on a screen and you can see a girl. She happens to be in Gaza in Palestine. I work with an organization called the Hands Up Project as a storyteller, teacher, volunteer. So although you can see one girl enjoying the storytelling, in fact, there may be tens, hundreds of young people enjoying the storytelling, either synchronously with me in the live video or asynchronously watching it later. But let's talk about storytelling. This is a statue. It's, or a sculpture, we could say, in the grounds of Bristol University, not so far from where I live in the west of England. And I came upon this sculpture just a couple of years ago and was enchanted by the possibility of walking inside. You can see there's an opening like a doorway. And when you go inside this sculpture, this is an image that you can see when you look up above your head. When you stand inside the sculpture, hollow, created by the artist Katie Patterson. Above and around you are samples from 10,000 tree species. These tree samples have been gathered from almost every country on the planet. They connect across time and space, each with their own story to tell. We're talking today about storytelling, and storytelling is a term, is a word that's bandied around and used in all sorts of spheres of life, from business to media, and rightly so. Even novelists are called storytellers. But what we're talking about here in this session today is storytelling for learning English, and particularly folk tales, traditional tales, tales that come from the world's oral cultures. And also we'll look at personal stories to a lesser extent, stories about our own lives and anecdotes. Even children, preschool, primary, early teens, can be supported in developing their skills as storytellers of folk tales and of personal storytellers. Folk tales encompasses fairy tales, myths, legends, fables, folk tales of all kinds. Tales that have not been authored by a single person, but have been passed down and honed over generations. So there's a metaphor clearly between Katie Patterson's sculpture and storytelling, where we can understand a story that comes from a different culture. In India, you have very many diverse cultures and languages, and you can learn from each other by sharing those stories. And I can understand the stories to some extent, even though as a person who doesn't come from India, there will be some references that I might not completely understand. But maybe the heart of the story or the main meaning of the story will be meaningful to me. So there's something both familiar and unfamiliar in the stories that I might hear from your own cultures, but I can learn a great deal through it. So there's a photograph that I took inside the sculpture, and this has become my background to my presentation, to my PowerPoint. This is Ruth Wayne Rib, who wrote a book called Stories. And she says, the primacy and enduring quality of storytelling are no doubt linked to its role through time in the maintenance of ethnic culture, essentially the way in which a collective group of people maintains and bequeaths its sense of its own identity. Among the people who were signing up, who were joining and saying good morning in the chat just now, I saw the name Sika Gurung, who's a friend of mine and a fellow storytelling teacher who works in Banepa in Nepal, in central Nepal. And Sika Gurung has recently started a storytelling festival in her school. We've worked together on this to some extent. And she gets her students, young teenagers, to come into the school with stories that they've learned from their own grandparents, stories they might not have otherwise found out, and retell those stories, both in their own languages, because they come from different language speaking groups, and also in English. And they tell the stories as part of a school festival, which is something that's being maintained. So in many parts of the world, globalization, maybe even English education, English medium education, to some extent might threaten local languages and cultures. So it's so important to bring those stories out, to get a sense of where we come from. Although in this globalized world where people are traveling and migrating, sometimes it's easy to lose touch and sometimes ask ourselves, where do I come from? But I have a sense of being a global storyteller. Although I tell stories from where I come from in the southwest of England, I also very much feel that stories from Nepal, Africa, India, Brazil, they're all part of my own heritage now as a global citizen. But tremendously important to know about where our local stories and our local cultures. She also writes, what for me is the essence, or one of the most essential parts or aspects of sharing stories. Storytelling is as old as time, and certainly predates the construction of the very modern notion of classroom, with the capacity to transport the hearer beyond all boundaries of time, space, language, ethnicity, class, and gender. Classrooms are very modern things. They've only been around for a couple of 100 years, really since industrialization. But storytelling's always been with us. It's part of human heritage everywhere, and it's the oldest form of education. So as teachers, we are all essentially storytellers. But within a story, we are very open to learning and to imagining being somewhere else, sometime else, through learning history, for example. We can learn other languages and about other languages and ethnic groups. We can imagine being from a different socioeconomic class, and we can even imagine being another gender. So the power of storytelling to develop empathy and work with our imaginations. So what do people say about storytelling? This is a storyteller, perhaps the most well-known storyteller in English language teaching globally, Andrew Wright, who's a good friend and collaborator. And he says, very simply, one of the many things that Andrew said is this: we're all storying creatures. So the infinite complexity of the information that comes to us, we filter it and turn it into narratives that make sense to us. And we do this with the traditional tales and with the stories that we tell when we get home at the end of a long day and talk about the argument we had, or the thing that we found, or the surprise. We tell it as a story. We omit all of the other day-to-day humdrum details to focus on what's actually meant something to us emotionally or intellectually during that day. But not only storytellers say that, also scientists. Antonio Damacio is one of the world's leading neuroscientists. Storytelling is something brains do naturally and implicitly. It pervades the entire fabric of human societies and cultures. We are the stories that we tell about ourselves, or that other people tell about us. So sometimes we need to work on how we can tell our stories so that to bring out the best of ourselves. Another man who's taught me a great deal about storytelling in language teaching is Mario Revelukri, another teacher, trainer and writer. And I want to distinguish here between storytelling, which is telling a story from the heart, a story that we've learned and a story that we know, in contrast to a story that we read aloud or recite. There is a difference. And Mario puts it very clearly here. If a teacher reads the story from a book, the page is often between her and the students. When she tells, she's a fountain and the words of the story gush forth from her. She and the story are one as the water is with the fountain. So there's nothing between me and you. And students, when they're hearing a story being told by you, as many of you know as storytelling teachers, there's a connection. They sense that you're giving something special and they will respond in a different way to it. It's not always easy. It takes time to learn a story and to be prepared to tell it in a classroom, whether it's a virtual classroom or a physical classroom. This is a book that I wrote a few years ago, Storytelling with Our Students. And I draw on this a lot in this session and in other sessions that I do. I'll talk about that and other publications. There's a handout that goes with this session, which you'll receive afterwards, which adds more to what I'm saying, because a lot of this session is going to be, as I said, like a workshop. And I just want to acknowledge people who I learn stories from. I don't just learn stories from books. or from online sources, I also more and more learn stories from people that I meet. And these are all students who I've taught English to in different parts, from different parts of the world, most of whom I've met face to face. Lumana Tamraka, the teenage girl on the right, is one of Sika Gurung's students who I mentioned earlier. And she is one of the students who told a story in Nepal and then shared her story with me, and has become a story that I've shared with many students in different parts of the world. So stories from Constantino on the left, Constantino Salomao from Angola, from Bundu culture, Iman Al-Harsha next to him from Libya, who told me a story that her mother told to her. Fern at the bottom left from Thailand, ML from Turkey, who told me a popular Nasruddin story. I'm sure many of you know Nasruddin. Francisco Perez, who told me a story from Mayan culture from Guatemala. People, we can be as teachers, people who learn stories as well. Learn from people we meet and people we teach, asking our students to come and share a story with us. So right now, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and you'll see my big face. And if you look at speaker view, you'll see me in the main screen. I would advise you to do that. And I'm going to tell you a story. In fact, I'm going to teach you a story that I've taught to many young learners. So we're going to look at 3 stories in this session. The first story will be is a story that we can do with young learners, say 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, maybe who are still learning English. And then later we'll do a story that's suitable for older learners, let's say from 10 upwards, to adults as well. Although there are many stories I tell which are suitable across the ages. But let's focus on these 2 stories, and then there'll be a little story, a little wisdom tale to finish off. So I'm going to stand up because when we're working with younger learners, we need to be physical. And I would advise you, if you can, to also stand up. When I'm telling stories online, I know that students can't always be heard, and I can't always be seen. If I'm in a Zoom class, I can see my students, but if I'm in a large classroom and I'm doing Facebook Live, for example, I have to imagine they're with me. I have to use the power of my imagination to imagine you are the other side of this camera, because I'm in a quiet room, but I know you're out there. So when you're joining in with the story with me, physically and verbally, and please do this, please be your child self, as we always are when we're in the middle of a story. I fully encourage you to use your voices to express yourselves, and maybe invite other members of your family into the room, so they can join in with the storytelling as well if they want to. Let's make this a story learning experience. So I'm going to teach you a story. We're only going to do 1 stage of the learning. Let's get on with it. If I say story, story, please say, tell us a story. You don't need to write it in the chat. You don't need to write anything during this. Just, well, I might ask you to write in the chat a bit later on in the story, because I might ask you to imagine what happens in the end. So listen carefully. So I say story, story, you say, tell us a story, and then we'll begin. This story comes from Tibet. I'm retelling a story that comes from Tibet. Story, story. Once upon a time, at the edge of a beautiful, clear lake, there lived a family of rabbits. Yes, please do the rabbits with me. One day, from the lake, there came a loud plop. The rabbits were frightened. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. They ran deep into the wood. There they met Fox. Where are you going, rabbits, in such a rush? Plop is coming. Fox, frightened, joined the rush. Say it with me. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. They ran deeper into the wood. There, the rabbits and the fox met. Yes. Monkey. Where are you going, rabbits and fox, in such a rush? Plop is coming. Monkey was frightened, and joined the rush. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. They ran deeper into the wood. There was the big, long-trunked elephant. Where are you going, rabbits, fox and monkey, in such a rush? Plop is coming. Elephant was frightened and joined the rush. Get your hands ready. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. They ran deeper into the wood. There they met golden fur, sharp teeth, powerful lion. Where are you going, rabbits, fox, monkey, elephant, in such a rush? Plop is coming. Lion was not frightened. Lion is never frightened. Plop? What is Plop? I don't know, said Elephant. Ask Monkey. I don't know, said Monkey. Ask Fox. I don't know, said Fox. Ask Rabbits. We don't know, said Rabbits. Plop came from the lake. Show me. Together, the animals. Now, can you remember all the animals? What was the first animal? Rabbits. And yes, fox and, oh yes, well done, monkey and, yeah, you remember, elephant and lion. Together, let's do all the actions. Rabbits, fox, monkey, elephant and lion went through the trees to the beautiful clear lake. They looked and they looked and they looked, and they found out what Plop is. What do you think? What do you think Plop is? Now, if you already know this story, keep it secret. But if you don't know, write in the chat now. What do you think Plop is? Let's see what you think. I'm reading your comments in the chat. What is Plop? Oh, Jayas. Oh, something falling in the water. What could it be falling in the water? A big stone. Maybe someone threw it. Plop. A boat, someone said. Oh, the sound of a fish jumping, everybody with a whoosh, plop. A small animal jumping, diving into the water. Eee, plop. What could that small animal be? Oh, a frog. Megabat says, a frog. Ribbit, Ribbit jumps into the lake with a plop. Or an alligator. That's a bigger animal. Wow. I love your ideas. A bird dropping something, maybe a little nut or a stone. It could be any one of those. Thank you for your ideas. But some of you said a coconut or a fruit. I wonder. Story. Together, let's do the animals again. The rabbits, fox, monkey, elephant, and lion looked and they looked and they looked. Next to the lake stood a tall tree. The tree was full of big, round, ripe fruit. One fruit fell into the lake with a plop. Look, said lion. Elephant, fetch the fruit. Elephant waded into the lake, picked up the fruit with his trunk. Elephant gave the fruit to monkey. Monkey peeled and divided the fruit. Monkey shared the fruit with all of the animals. Rabbits, fox, monkey, elephant, and lion shared the fruit. Oh, it was tasty. It was tasty. It was tasty. Look, said lion. There was nothing to be frightened of. So that is my retelling of the traditional chain tale from Tibet of the story Plop. And thank you for all of your wonderful ideas. Now, you can imagine that when we're learning that story with children, it's very much an action story, and we're doing the actions together. The pictures can help as a memory aid. We might show the picture together with an image. Let's just check. Oh, what animal's that one? Do you remember? Is it rabbits? Oh no, that's the wrong one, isn't it? But you know what I mean. We can be getting them saying, no, that's not rabbits. We can be playing with the images. We could be setting the scene if they need a bit of background knowledge. Here's a scene setting image. We could also give them some phrases from the story, especially the rhyme. So we can use images and prompts if we need to. But what we can then move on to do is children telling the story together. And we can do that online, but we can also do that face-to-face and physically. We all know that with storytelling, task repetition is a very important way of learning. Research shows how task repetition is fundamental for learning languages. And certainly we all know that storytelling, particularly children's storytelling with repetition, it's all about developing language skills. And it's fun. The drilling is inherent, it's built into the storytelling process. I'm going to show you a little video clip of some children in the UK learning the story Plop. So what we did is, after the first telling, they all chose their favorite animals, and we did some animal mimes from the story. So we all mimed the rabbit and the fox and the monkey and running in fear. But then we joined hands in a circle, and we all held hands in a big circle in the classroom, and we retold the story. And after each sequence of the story, we stepped to the left. So we held hands and stepped to the left. So we were telling the story in unison. With younger children's storytelling, we often have almost a fixed script that we can work with. So let me show you that clip, very quick. Excuse me, I'm trying to get out of the slideshow mode, and sometimes when I'm in Zoom, my laptop responds very slowly. Okay, well, I'm going to leave that video clip. It might happen later, but what I can say is there's a lovely set of videos that I'm sharing in the handout. Children in different contexts being told the story of Plop, and in one case actually learning the story Plop. And as I was going to show you, they're standing in a circle and telling the story chorally. And that can move on to them telling the story in pairs, where they're holding arm in arm, two students stepping through the story together. So a physical retelling. It's all described. So that's the story of Plop. There's also in the handout a link to watching me telling that story as part of the Hands Up project. So it's telling that story online, and you can see the whole process. So it's about a 45-minute lesson, including children through the chat helping me to create a song about the animals in the story. So we can move on from story to song. We can link those things together. So what about storytelling online, virtual storytelling? It's quite challenging. This is Adrian Underhill, and at a recent get-together, the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, IATEFL, had a global get-together in April because the annual conference, which was going to happen in the UK, had to be deferred until next year because of the pandemic. So in the global get-together, where the focus was on online learning, Adrian Underhill posed this question: could online teaching provide an affective game changer that unhooks us from our noisy classroom omnipresence to talking across the kitchen table? So, of course, it's wonderful to be in the same physical space as our learners when we're doing storytelling, and I miss that. But online storytelling can afford us some things that we don't get with that physical space. In a classroom, for example, in a hall, I'm often having to raise my voice or lower my voice to get the children's attention. There are many distractions around. I would ask that students are in an undisturbed space in their home as much as possible. That might be difficult when they're doing an English class with me. But if we can if we can manage it, there's an intimacy that we can have when we're talking into this little camera that I'm pointing at now on my laptop, this little point of light, where I'm looking at you, and there's an intimacy. So even though there may be a few hundred teachers with me right now, you probably have the sense that I'm talking to you alone. And in my imagination, I'm talking to you in your kitchen, in your veranda, enjoying this webinar, maybe being distracted, maybe having a drink while you're listening, or just sitting. And I imagine it might be quite warm where some of you are, maybe very hot but you're in your own individual setting, but you're with me. We're one-to-one in a way. So there does seem to be a possibility for an intimacy, which is almost a bit like the way we do storytelling with our parent, you know, the bedtime story, if you like, or the comfortable story where it's special time with an older relative or a grandparent. How can we do online storytelling effectively? We're using space differently. The space I've got to play with is just this room I'm in at the moment. I stood up. A lot of storytelling online takes place like this, with just a head and shoulders shot, like you can see me now. But we can play with the space. We can stand up and move around and step back from the camera. We might need to raise the level of our voice so that we can be heard more clearly if we're more than a meter away from the microphone on our device. But we can do that. So we need to prepare our space carefully and think about the height of the camera. Right now, I've endeavored to sit, I'm sitting in a very low stool, so I'm the same height as the camera. Because if I'm sitting in a chair and I'm looking down, let me just imagine that, you have the feeling that I'm maybe looking down at you now when we're not equal. Equally, I could be lower, and then gives me slightly lower status if I'm looking up at you. So we try to kind of have a level, equal relationship. Can be quite effective, and being aware of the frame. So I would normally finish the story by saying that it was tasty, but I said it was tasty. So I kept within the frame of the picture. So thinking about how our movements are effective. Think about the microphone, think about the lighting. I'm sitting now facing the window, so there's light from the window. And there's an even distribution of light on my face. I'm not one side in shadow. And I would never do it with the window behind me where I'm silhouetted. It's important as a teacher for you to be seen so your students can see your expression and the details of your face, I think. Eye contact through the camera. There's a tendency, especially on Zoom, for example, we're looking at the people in the room. But remember that if you're looking at the people in the room, it doesn't look like to them that you're giving them eye contact, and it can be immensely effective. I mean, imagine I was doing this. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. And now I look at the camera, they ran and they ran as fast as they could. So it's very different when I'm talking into the camera. Another facility we have with online is the chat. I loved the way you all wrote down your ideas for what Plop could be. And everybody could be sharing their ideas simultaneously. That might not be so easy in a noisy classroom. Of course, we can ask students to pair and then share, and that would work very well. But in the chat, they can all write at the same time, and we can respond to what different students say. Sorry, I couldn't respond to all of your ideas. You're rather a big group. As I said, we need to use the power of our imagination when we're doing virtual storytelling. We have to imagine the audience, the other side of the camera. And if I'm a storytelling teacher, like many of you are, I sometimes think, well, what are they doing? Are they actually listening to me? How am I going to engage them? But I would suggest, remember the feeling you had when you told the story face to face in the classroom, and then replicate that. Have that memory of that joyful experience and feel that. Imagine that feeling that you had when you told the story before. And perhaps they will engage in the same way, even through this possible apparent barrier of a screen and physical distance. I asked you to mute yourselves. Well, actually, you are muted, but if I'm doing a storytelling on Zoom, I often ask students to mute yourself, because if they're all joining in, they ran and they ran as fast as they could orally, and they're unmuted, the sounds aren't in sync. So it can be distracting. But we can ask students to be speaking while they're muted. And in fact, this can be a way of breaking through inhibitions about what they sound like when they're speaking English, or indeed talking publicly. They can feel more confident to express themselves vocally and freely when they're muted. We can do listen and repeat activities, even if we can't hear them. We can still do them. We can ask them to invite people into the room. In a classroom, we can only teach the child, but here I could say, well, invite your brothers and sisters, your mother, your father, somebody in your household, somebody who's working in your household, bring them into the room and tell this and join in with the storytelling, so we can cross through the family or the community in this way. We're not so restricted. So there are advantages to online storytelling, although it doesn't do the same thing, it doesn't feel the same as being physically present in the room. Okay, so let's move on to another aspect, another story. And this is a story that I do often with teenagers, and you'll see why. Plop can be a story where we talk about our fears. We could get children to talk about things that they've been frightened of but aren't really dangerous. And it's good to be informed, like the lion. Let's find out what Plop is. A lot of children are fearful about coronavirus. Of course they are. But the more informed they are about what they need to do to take precautions and how we can avoid this disease, they're empowered, and they will feel more confident and less afraid if they're knowledgeable about it. So this is a good story for the times we're in. Let's do another story which fits with the times we're in. It's a story that a writer called Idris Shah collected in his Tales of the Dervishes, so stories from Middle Eastern Sufi wisdom, so from Islamic thought. And I'm going to ask you to make a prediction about the story before we begin. So I'm going to just show you the story, but I'm going to show it to you in a different form. This is a word cloud, and this word cloud contains all of the key words in this story. And you can see right in the middle the name Fatima. So this is a story about a young woman called Fatima. And if you look at the words that are big, these are the words that occur with the greatest frequency in the story. So I recorded myself telling this story, and then I turned that recording, I transcribed it, and from the transcription, I put the words into a word cloud, and it showed that the main words that I used were Fatima, emperor, masts, cloth, ship, rope, China, etc. I hope you can see all of those words. It's a story that starts in Morocco and travels across the world, and the story finishes in China. So already, while you're looking at the words, you're starting to imagine. We know it's about a young woman called Fatima. We know that she travels across the world. We can see a lot of the key vocabulary, and already you are beginning to imagine what happens in the story. So what I'd like to do, what I would do with students now is say, right, ask me questions, but you've only got 1 minute, and I will answer your questions, and then I'm going to ask you to predict the plot, to predict the story before I tell it. So now let's do that. I'm going to open my chat. Please could you write questions, and I will answer as many as I can. Oh dear, skip forward there. I will answer as many questions as I can in the next minute. Okay, I'm going to stop the share a moment because I can't. I'm sorry, I'll stop sharing the screen because I'm having problems seeing the chat. And now I can see it. Okay. So hopefully you can remember some of that vocabulary. I'm going to ask your questions now. Did something wrong happen to Fatima? Yes, actually more than one thing. Several things happened to Fatima which were very difficult, but she had to overcome those difficulties. Is she traveling alone? At the beginning, she's traveling with her father, who is a rope spinner. But then she loses her father. He drowns in the sea during a storm. Why is she traveling to so many countries? Partly it is her own choice to travel, but then she also gets abducted and taken into slavery. So sometimes she's going without choice, but in the end, she travels to India and China as an agent, as a businesswoman. Cloth trader. She isn't a cloth trader, no. Is Fatima poor? At some points in the story, she has nothing. At other points in the story, she has plenty. Is the story related to weaving? Yes, she learns how to weave strong sailcloth in the north of Africa near Alexandria. Is she a teacher? That's a wonderful question, because this story I'm telling you because tomorrow in India is Teachers' Day. So at the end of the story, Fatima does become a teacher. That's very important. How would I describe the character of Fatima? Very intelligent, very quick to learn, very curious, brave, but also sometimes, like all of us, she falls into despair. Yes, her ship is wrecked twice, the first time with her father, the second time when she's trading off the coast of China. She doesn't make cloth for the emperor, no. No, the emperor asks her to make something extraordinary. Does the emperor appreciate Fatima? He does. Does she visit Istanbul? This is the last question I'm going to answer. She does visit, but she doesn't go as a visitor. She's taken there as a slave and sold in the market in Istanbul. All right, that's all the questions you're going to get answers to. So some things you know and some things you don't yet know. So now I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to, in the chat, write down in about 20 words or 30 words, what do you think is the main plot line of the story that I'm going to tell you about Fatima? So you're exercising your imagination and predicting. So don't write something short, write a bit longer. I'll give you a couple of minutes to write it down. So the first one's already come in from Myra, The Extraordinary Tale of an Extraordinary Girl, Fatima. Well, that would be a good title, but could you give me more detail? So as I said, maybe 20 to 30 words actually outlining the plot that you imagine. What do you think is going to happen in this story? So write a bit longer, please. Yes, I will show the image of the words again. That would be useful for you. Okay, got one more minute to finish writing your plot line. So use what you know, but also what you imagine. Fill in the gaps. See, normally I would do, when I'm doing this on Zoom, I would put you into breakout rooms in pairs and you would predict the story together. So this is the first time I've been asking people to do this as a chat. So each time we need to adapt to the context. Maybe I should be giving you longer than 2 or 3 minutes and more than 20 to 30 words if you're really going to give a summary, but I'm conscious of time. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and let's have a look. Could you read what people have put in and see if someone else has got a plot summary that's similar to yours, or maybe find one that you think is interesting, maybe one that you think, oh, that's a really interesting idea that I hadn't thought of. So just scroll through and read some other people's plot summaries. We're not going to have time to read all of them because there are many of you. There's some great plot summaries. I'm just going to look at one from, it says Ute, Y-U-T. I imagine that's an abbreviation of your name. Can you see that one? One of the first ones that came in. I'm just going to read that one out. Fatima was a poor girl, says Ute, who journeyed with her father to find their fortune. Unfortunately, a shipwreck hit them, and she was sold as a slave. However, Fatima used her courage and determination to make the best of a bad situation and earned the emperor's trust. He then began to rely on her and made her an ambassador. Beautiful. So you've taken that little bit of information I gave you and turned it into a narrative that makes perfect sense. Yes, just look at some other people's summaries. So this exercise, what you've just been doing is building up your imagination, thinking, and if we had more time, we could be combining different ideas together, sharing ideas, maybe even writing a plot summary together collaboratively. But now I'm going to ask you to hold on to your plot prediction, and now I'm going to tell you the story. And at the end, I'll ask you to compare the story that I tell, which is a longer story, and the story that you imagined. What are the similarities and what are the differences? After that, I'm going to ask you to do some drama-based activity, and then we'll also think and respond to questions about the story of Fatima. So this is a process of something that I would do with teenagers, and then finally we'll also relate it to a personal experience, a personal story. I'll tell you a personal story that Fatima reminds me of, and you can tell us a little bit about a story that it reminds you of. So how we might move from the folk tale to the personal story. So I would advise you to put me into speaker view so you can see me full screen if you haven't got that already. And let me tell you Fatima's story. I haven't told you the title of the story yet, by the way. Story. Could you say after me? Everything is lost. Why is this happening to me? Let's say it together. Everything is lost. Why is this happening to me? Kan je me kan, fikkedim as a man. Long, long ago, there was a girl called Fatima, a young woman. She lived with her father near the coast of Morocco. Her father was a spinner of rope, and he had taught his daughter all he knew. One day he said to Fatima, "I am going on a journey. I will sail in a ship across the Middle Sea to trade, to sell my rope. Fatima, you can stay and spin rope." "Father, let me come with you. You have taught me how to spin rope. Now teach me how to trade." "Very well, my daughter." And he took Fatima on board the ship, and they sailed with their rope. They sailed from island to island across the Middle Sea. They did well. Fatima learned to trade. But there, off the coast of North Africa, a wind began to blow. A strong gale, and then a storm broke. The waves rode high and crashed down. Her father, trying to save his cargo of precious rope, was washed by a sudden wave overboard. Fatima saw her father going under the water. She reached but could not save him. "Father!" The ship continued to roll and rock. It was wrecked on rocks. Fatima alone survived, shipwrecked, stranded on the shore of North Africa. And as she stood there all alone, she said, "Everything is lost. Why is this happening to me?" She walked barefoot along the shore and came to a small community, a village, a poor village. The people worked making cloth. They had large wooden looms. They made stout, strong cloth for making sails for the ships that sailed out of the port of Alexandria. Fatima learned from them how to make cloth. They welcomed her. They made her one of their own. Soon she felt that this was her new home, her new community. Fatima worked so hard. Months passed, and one day raiders came in a ship, slavers. They seized Fatima from the shore. They put her on the ship and she sailed away against her will. And the ship came to shore in Istanbul, the great port city. And there poor Fatima was put up for sale in the market. Everything is lost. Why is this happening to me? A gentleman walked through that market and saw this poor young woman. He took pity on her. He paid, but he said, "You will not be my slave. I will look after you. You will be a companion for my wife." Fatima was brought to his home. He was a maker of masts, tall wooden masts for the ships that were built there in Istanbul. Fatima thanked him. He and his wife looked after her kindly. "Let me help you," said Fatima. "Let me help you to make masts." One day he had bad news that a ship of his was lost at sea. His whole cargo. "I am ruined." Fatima said, "No, together you and I will build up your business again. I have learned so much from you. Let me do this to repay your kindness." And together they did. More months passed and they had made enough tall, strong, fine wooden masts. He said to Fatima, "I trust you. You can be my agent. Take the cargo of masts, sail on my ship, go to India and beyond. I trust you, Fatima." Well, Fatima felt honored. She said goodbye to the mast maker and his wife and set sail on that ship. Far she traveled, on to India, where they did good business. She made good profit, and then on towards the shores of China. But now another wind blew. a storm worse than the one before. Great winds, a typhoon, a storm unheard of in her homeland. The ship was carried up one side of a wave and down the other. The storm raged, and Fatima remembered her dear father, whose life was lost in a storm. Fatima used her knowledge. She tied herself with a rope to a wooden mast. The ship capsized. Fatima floated, carried on that mast, unconscious. And when she woke, she was on the shores of China, again alone. Everything is lost. Why is this happening to me? Can you imagine what happened? There was a great emperor, the Emperor of China. And one night the emperor had a dream. In the morning he came to his advisors. Tell me, last night I had a dream that wherever I travel in my lands, wherever I travel in my territories, I can take a new palace with me, a transportable palace. How can this be done? His advisors looked at him. They were confused. A palace that you can carry. It cannot be done. It can, said the emperor. In my dream, there was a woman from a distant land who showed how to do it. Find her. Messengers were sent far and wide, all over the lands. And as you can imagine, one of those messengers came towards the shore and met this young woman, clearly from another land. He brought her to the emperor. So your name is Fatima, said the emperor. Fatima, can you make for me a palace that I can transport with me throughout my lands? Fatima thought, and then remembered when she had been in her homeland in Morocco and in North Africa and in Istanbul. She had seen traders who traveled great distances and then lived in wonderful decorated tents. Perhaps, said Fatima. Bring me lengths of strong rope, the best rope you have. The rope was brought, but Fatima tested it. This rope is not strong enough. Bring me your crop of flax. All the flax that could be brought was brought. And Fatima began to spin the flax into rope, strong rope, just as she had learned from her father. She taught those who worked for the emperor how to spin good rope. After a month, enough rope had been made, great lengths of strong rope. And she said to the emperor, now I need cloth. Bring me great quantities of the stoutest cloth. But you know what happened. The cloth that was brought was good, but not strong enough. Build looms, said Fatima. And she remembered the design of the looms that she had seen in that community near Alexandria. The wooden looms were built to her specifications. And she showed those workers how to make the stout cloth, like the sailcloth that she had learned to make before. After a month, enough cloth had been made, vast quantities. And she said to the emperor, now I need wooden poles, tall and straight. But the poles that were brought were not strong enough or long enough. Cut down the tallest trees. Bring me the best timber. The timber that was brought, Fatima began to work, remembering the skills she had learnt from the Istanbul mast maker. She enlisted the help of the workers, the emperor's workers. They learned quickly. And after another month, long poles had been made. Fatima remembered the tents that she had seen. She put up this wonderful tent, as grand as a palace, decorated in red and gold. And when the emperor came, he was amazed. Fatima, what you have made is beyond my dreams. The sides moved gently in the breeze. And when the emperor stepped inside, he looked open-mouthed at the beautiful palace, as fine as any palace I have ever seen. She showed how it could be taken down and transported. Fatima, whatever you want, I will give you. Tell me your heart's desire. I have had many homes, and I have been welcomed. But here I have used the skills that I learned, and I have become a teacher. I have taught your workers what I know, but perhaps I have more I can teach. If you let me teach and live here, then I will be glad. Is that all? Said the emperor. It is given warmly and freely. Fatima lived a good long life as a teacher in that land of China. This is the story of Fatima, the spinner and the tent. Fatima, the teacher. A story for you, teachers, because tomorrow is Teachers' Day. So, how was that story similar to the story that you imagined I was going to tell, based on the questions and the word cloud I showed you? How similar was your story, or were there some big differences? If we have more time, we could discuss that, and certainly when there's an opportunity for student discussion in pairs or in small groups, that's wonderful. And then the next activity, I might ask students to choose a favorite moment from the story. So can I ask some of you just to write down a favorite moment? So look at this moment in your mind's eye. What can you see? What's the image or the sound or the feeling, the colors, the shapes, the sensations? What do the characters want? What's your favorite moment? Could you just write a short description of your favorite moment? The title of the story, I can see that questions come up, in Idris Shah's book, Tales of the Dervishes, is Fatima, the Spinner and the Tent. And a transcription of my telling of that story is in the handout that you'll receive. So Priya Balasubramyan says, your favorite moment is the moment the emperor looked at the palace. Thank you, Priya. Can everybody remember Priya's moment? Maybe some of you chose the same moment when the emperor saw that wonderful tent palace for the first time. Yes, other people have chosen the same moment. I wonder if anybody chose a different moment. Deepa Praveen says, my favorite moment when Fatima was taken by the kind man. Maybe in the slave market, you mean, when he paid, but he didn't take her as a slave. Was that Deepa? So can you remember Deepa's moment, please? And let's have one more. The storm. Okay, Geeta Konda says the storm. So thank you, Geeta. The storm and how she saves herself. So let's take it as the second storm, when she saves herself by tying herself to the wooden mast. Thank you. So if you're able to, please could you stand up? You can sit down if you want to, but I like standing up. And we'll do a quick drama. And this is a way of physicalizing a moment from the story. We all know about the power of drama. So that first moment we're going to choose is when she saves herself in the storm. So imagine the storm is raging and we're going to make a freeze. When we make a freeze, we use our bodies, every muscle is tense, our facial expressions. And then we don't make a sound, we don't make a movement. And this is a great thing to do in a video conference teaching lesson. So 3, everybody, can you get ready using all your body? So it's 3, 2, 1, and freeze. And relax. And this time do it again, but this time look at the camera so you can see me and I can imagine seeing you if we were on video conference, and make it even stronger and bigger, because when we're doing freeze in drama and storytelling, we often exaggerate it, or not exaggerate too much, but we heighten it to add to the power of the drama. 3, 2, 1, and freeze. And there's Fatima. She's going to be saved, floating on that mast. Okay. And another moment you chose, let me remember. Oh, let's just do one more moment. When the emperor sees the tent for the first time, could you all look at the camera? So this is Fatima in the camera, and I'm looking at the tent. Oh, sorry, the tent is the camera. Okay, 3, 2, 1. This time, can you actually speak the emperor's words as you imagine them? So do it again. I'm not going to speak, but you can actually bring it to life. So you might begin by saying, Fatima, this, and you can continue. Go 3, 2, 1. And action. So please tell me. Oh, wonderful. And maybe you have a lot to say to Fatima about her amazing design and how did she manage to remember it, and your great gratitude for this incredible gift. So we might use role play as well. So we've used freeze drama, but also an improvised role play, which can be developed into a piece of drama. But when I'm doing drama with learners of English who might not be acting students, might not be drama students, very often beginning with improvisation, where they're expressing themselves very freely before they then script it and develop it into a performance piece. Okay, so one more activity for Fatima, and I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. 28 questions. 28 questions, you're saying? Now, normally in traditional teaching, the teacher asks questions and the students have to answer, and typically there might be a right or the wrong answer, or a multiple choice ABC. But with storytelling, it's wonderful to focus on creative response, creative expression. So I would like to give you 28 questions, and these questions don't have a right or wrong answer. So they're personal response questions, you could say, creative or personal response. You can choose 2 or 3 questions and write down your answer. So you can choose any question you want. And write in the chat, write the number of the question and your answer to the question. Briefly, I'll just give you a couple of minutes to choose 2 or 3 questions from the long list, whichever question grabs you. Some of the questions are more intellectual or critical. Some of the questions are more sensory, about senses or feelings or thinking about other people. So empathy kind of questions, but they're all creative personal response. So here are the questions. Oh, by the way, that's a couple of learners, teenagers, who were doing, this is a freeze from them doing a role play of the Emperor and Fatima when he sees the tent at the end. And that the whole video is there on the handout. There's a link, so I would encourage you to watch that later. So here are the 28 questions. So choose 2 or 3 questions, and for a couple of minutes, please just write your answers, your own personal answers. I'm having trouble seeing your answers, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen and try to remember what question numbers are, which is going to be a bit tricky, but let's see. So if you can finish writing your current answer, and I'm going to stop sharing, and we're just going to talk about some of your answers. So could you, when you finished writing, can you read other people's answers? And they could be answers to the same question you answered or to other questions. I know lots of answers will be coming in the chat, but you can control that by using your by scrolling. Oh, it's fascinating to look at your questions and your answers. So some people are talking about colors. Blue. I wonder why you chose blue as the color of the story. I wonder if it's because of the sea. Is it a children's story? Daryl Marion says you can teach the story to any age. Depends on who is the storyteller. So yeah, it could be a story for children. Certainly for adults as well. So it's one of those stories that crosses over. Would you tell it to 5-year-olds? Perhaps. Maybe you would modify the story. Okay. We could spend a long time, and this is what we would do in our classes, of course, is talking about our answers. And it's wonderful, this freedom from having the wrong or right answer. People talk about the tyranny of the one correct answer. And it's so liberating for students to be able to answer freely and express themselves, their own ideas and their own thoughts. And how they answer these questions can be very revealing. So often I would put students into small groups to talk about the questions that they answered and to really listen to each other's answers, not saying, oh, your answer is different from mine, your answer is wrong, but to listen openly and say, well, that's interesting. you found something different from me in that story, in the motives of that character. Notice that the questions I asked you, those 28 questions, were not specific questions to this story. Those questions are generic questions that could be used with any folk tale. So there's a lot of freedom to play. And if I just share those questions again, as I said, they have different question types. So some of them about our responses, enjoying the story, liking the story, colors and sounds, feelings, suppressed, upset, made you laugh, meanings, what you liked or didn't like, noticing the meta side of it, the storyteller's voice, the storyteller's attitude, and then imagining which character were you. And you'll find that different students select very different questions, and that might be an indicator of what kind of learner they are, or perhaps it's just the mood or what grabs them in the story that they relate to their own life experience. And some critical students might like to answer question 28. What's the most senseless question? Because it doesn't make sense to them. As I said, it can be very revealing. Often I ask students to use their own answers and other people's answers to then do some creative writing, maybe even writing a poem about an aspect of the story. There's a lot of possibilities there. Okay, so I talked about personal storytelling. So I'm going to ask you, does the story of Fatima, the spinner and the tent, Fatima who became a teacher, does it remind you of a personal story? Something that happened to you or something that happened to somebody you know? And typically I would begin this activity with students by telling a personal story from me, the teacher in the room. So they've had the Fatima example from as a folk tale. They have the story from the teacher, and then that acts as a model. So the teacher is a model for then students to tell a story. And if students don't have a story to tell, that's fine, because they will be the listener. They will listen to their partner's story, and then they can retell their partner's story to another person. So let me tell you my story. Story. I'd like to tell you about my sister, Kathy. I've got 3 sisters, 2 older and 1 younger. My next older sister, Kathy, had a really difficult time at school. Yes, we're back on the theme of teaching again. Back in the 1950s or 1960s, when Kathy was at primary school, there was very little awareness of learning disabilities, for example, dyslexia. And my sister Kathy has dyslexia. So she found it really difficult to start reading, and the school didn't have the skills or the knowledge to help her. In fact, one of her teachers, well, I can't call her a teacher because this person treated my sister very cruelly, would humiliate my sister in the classroom, would even sometimes make her stand on a chair and try to spell her name again and again and again. So you can imagine how humiliated and how my sister was put off her education. And this went on right through to her teenage years, when she fell in with not a bad crowd, but certainly her natural intelligence was overlooked. And she was in groups of students where the focus wasn't on academic learning, and she was ignored. I have to confess, as her younger brother, I probably wasn't very kind to her because I was successful academically, but I was too young to be very empathetic or aware. This went on. She had a difficult time as a young adult. She got into a relationship that was negative for her, and she had twin sons with a man who treated her very cruelly. In fact, he was an addict. I say was because he died a number of years ago, but that was after they had split. Kathy actually escaped from him with her 2 little boys because he was a dangerous person to be around. But at that point, Kathy made a decision. She had the support of her family, but that wasn't enough. She needed to do it for herself. She went back to education. She knew that she was an empathetic person, that she wanted to help others. My elder sister is a teacher, I'm a teacher, and Kathy felt that she had something to offer as well. So she trained as a counsellor, psychotherapist. She studied, and although she struggled with reading and writing, she took her time and she dedicated her time to mothering and studying. And about 10 years ago, no, actually much more than 10 years ago now, she completed her studies and became a qualified and certified counsellor in the UK. Now, Kathy's story came to my mind when I read Fatima's story, or when I heard Fatima's story. A person who used skills that she had developed, even though at the time she wasn't really aware of why they were useful to her. Her difficult relationships, her feeling of inadequacy, things that she overcame were hugely important to her when she became a counsellor, and she was helping people who had also suffered adversity and setbacks in their lives. I'm not going to go into great detail about Kathy's story, but I do want to share a photograph. So there's my sister's web, my sister Kathy Heathfield, the bottom right, and yeah, about the therapist. So yes, you know it's a true story. It's deeply powerful for students to hear stories from their teachers of this kind. They can relate to the story. They know their teacher is revealing something personal. And I know many of us are hesitant about revealing too much about ourselves, but we can choose what we reveal. And it creates a sense of bonding and community in the classroom. And then we can ask students, would they like to talk about somebody that has overcome adversity? Of course, we need to give students the permission not to have to tell a story if they feel it's too personal. We can give them phrases like, that's private, or I'd rather not say, or I'd prefer just to listen. But most of us will know somebody who has overcome difficulties and made a success, like Fatima. Yes, I agree with you, Sika. Personal stories are powerful. But you can see the trajectory from the folktale to the personal story can be very effective. So I'm not going to ask you now to tell a story, but some of you might choose just to, in the chat, write the title of a story that you might tell. Creative response. So a creative response are tasks where students can respond using, well, creatively, of course. And I use many of these kinds of activities and write about them in my book, Storytelling with Our Students, and in other publications that I've written in. I'm inspired by people like Mario Revelukri, Noreen Kaplan-Spence, and Dr. Alida Gersi, who's a storyteller who works in therapy as well as education. And a lot of these activities focus around mental imagery, asking students to talk about or write about what they've imagined when they're listening to a story. When we're listening to a story, often we're in the world of the story. We're walking through the landscape of the story. We enter into the storytelling space. So it's not only visual, although for most people it is very visual, but it can also be sounds and sensations and smells and tastes, even warmth and cold, particularly for very kinesthetic learners. We can get them to describe that. We can do freeze images, just like we did with Fatima, and improvised role play, like the role play between Fatima and the emperor. We could choose a gift for a character. Choose a character in the story, and what would you like to give them? Okay, so for example, let's say the merchant, not the merchant, the mast maker. At the mast maker, well, Fatima doesn't return to Istanbul. He's lost his cargo again. What gift would you like to give him? If you want to, you can write it in the chat. So we can, in any story, we could find a character who we might like to give something to, and it could be very revealing what our students say. It could be something tangible, or it could be something like a quality or an ability. Some students might say, well, you know, maybe he can receive the money that Fatima made from the mast making, from money that she earned from the emperor. Perhaps he can send it along the Silk Road to Istanbul, and one day it will reach him safely. But it could also be, you can choose. We could ask students to do a movement or a dance in response to the story. These things take a bit more time. Mental imagery, freeze, improvise, role play, these can be done instantly. Things like developing a dance or a performance, creating a poem, and the poem could be about the story or about a character or about a moment in the story, or a song. It could be from a character's perspective. Drawing a picture or any other kind of artwork, could be modeling. We can use digital tools to do creative response as well. I'm not an expert on that, but you know there are many possibilities. We could, I've left a gap there because really there are so many possibilities that you've probably used yourselves as storytelling teachers. Could be making animations, making a storyboard, resetting the story in a modern context, changing the ending to the story, doing a hot seat, interviewing a character in the story. Many possibilities, but all of these activities, and many of them are outlined in what I've written, are getting students to think more deeply and to think creatively, and maybe relating it to their own lives. And indeed, responding with a personal story is another important kind of creative response. At the bottom of that list, I've written students self-select response task. This I learned from Noreen Kaplan-Spence, the idea that students have very different abilities and different interests in a class. So it might be that while some students would like to write a poem, Fatima's poem, other students would prefer to do some artwork, and other students might want to do some drama. And why not set a time? You know, you've all got a couple of hours to work on that, and at 12 o'clock we'll all come back together and you can show each other what you've produced. So you can put people together who've worked with different media or different art forms. So working with students' strengths, or we might do the opposite. We might be wanting to encourage students who feel underconfident in their art skills to focus on that. So we can do a combination of encouraging or self-selecting. Let me talk briefly a bit more about personal storytelling. I wrote a chapter for the British Council in this talk. Creativity in the English language classroom. This is a free book. It's there in the, it's available as a PDF, so you can easily download it, and it'll be there in the handout. And in my chapter, I talk about personal storytelling. One thing I wrote there was this, and there's lots of simple activities to get children telling and young teenagers telling personal stories. By bringing creative personal storytelling activities into your teaching, you're sowing seeds on fertile soil. With your gentle nurturing, student stories grow and flourish and bring colour to the learning in your classroom in ways that can't be foreseen. One student responds to a classmate story by telling another, deepening their appreciation of each other's thoughts, feelings, experiences, and differences. The reciprocal nature of storytelling means that students begin to share their stories spontaneously with minimal teaching input. The content is rich and meaningful, so students become increasingly involved in each other's life stories, and their learning environment evolves into a self-sustaining community. Obviously, with younger children, they need a lot of structure, a lot of guidance and framing for their personal stories. So in the case of Plop, after telling Plop, we might just get them to tell a story about something that they were scared about, but then afterwards they weren't scared anymore, and tell, you know, what created the change, or something they're scared about, but they project forward into the future when they won't be frightened about it any longer. So we can frame it very differently for different age groups, but essentially we're building up that confidence for the school to be a community of sharing stories. This is, on the left, Grace Hallworth, and she is one of the patrons of the Society for Storytelling in the UK, a wonderful woman who I've had the honour to meet. And she writes this: storytelling is a union of head, heart and spirit, and a unique expression. We should therefore allow space for an individual response from those with whom we share our understanding. Now, essentially, storytelling is community. Storytelling is about building community and a collective response, of course, especially when we're sharing a story with a group of people like I am now. So you will respond to Fatima's story in, you know, on one level, you're all responding together collectively, but on another level, we all will respond to it individually according to our experiences, our mood, our attitude, and maybe something that just happened before you listen to the story, or something that's on your mind, something you're worried about, maybe that meeting you're going to have later. All of these things will affect what we hear. Or in the case of a lake, for example, in Plop, when I tell you the story, but lots of you will be imagining a particular lake that you've visited or that you live near. So your personal experience influences what you hear, and that can come out again in the personal response. I've been working a lot with the Hands Up project, which is a charity where children in Palestine and in Gaza in particular, who are living in extremely difficult circumstances, have an opportunity to communicate with other children outside of Palestine. So we teach and do storytelling sessions with children who are trapped in Palestine. And one of the other volunteers, a Palestinian teacher, is called Haneen. This is Haneen Jadala. She teaches at the United Nations school, one of the United Nations school, Asma Prep Girls School. And she wrote this recently about her experience of storytelling online with children in Gaza and around the world. And I just think this is a testament to what we can achieve now. We don't necessarily only need to be telling stories to our students in our own classes, for example, yours in India, but we can also find opportunities to get students communicating across borders. So she wrote a blog for the Hands Up project, which you can visit the Hands Up Project page if you're interested. The irresistible power of storytelling in a time of crisis, stories for survival. And she's particularly referring to the lockdown in Gaza. I know that you're locked down in India as well. She says, I believe that learning can happen at any place and at any time, irrespective of all the obstacles which are placed in the way. Students can travel even more easily by their imagination with the storytelling sessions far away. They live the actions of the stories in their mind, smell the aromatic scents of the scenes as if they are really with them, and hear the music in their own silence to cheer their spirits in spite of all the hard times they pass through. Learning through online stories can be immensely effective for the students, maybe even more so than what happens in their regular classes. It's about sharing and discussing values, gathering all together and feeling united, sharing cultural aspects, and even creating a future generation of storytellers. Moreover, it's a kind of survival for those learners wherever they are. It helps them to escape from being stuck at home in self-isolation to a more motivating international cultural context. Well, a lovely sentiment and testament, and it's borne out by the responses of the children there. So we're coming towards the end of this session, and in a moment I'll be asking for questions, and there'll be a question answer opportunity. But first, let me show you some more slides. And at the end of all of this, I'm going to tell you another story about a teacher, for Teachers' Day tomorrow. But we're coming back to this theme of the stories from many different cultures and how we can learn together and have more appreciation of diversity. Resilience in the face of uncertainty. I've got a question for you, and that is, how can we apply storytelling across the curriculum? I mean, here we've been talking about it in the context of learning English, but of course, storytelling pervades all of teaching, all of education. So let's take the examples of Plop for younger learners and Fatima the Spinner in the Tent for older children, young teens. How could those stories also be applied in other parts of the curriculum that you teach? And rather than me answer that question myself, I'd be very interested to know your ideas. So start writing that down in the chat while I just finish with these couple more slides. There's the world of stories that we're building. We can enjoy stories from all around the world. And indeed, I love telling stories from every different culture. I have stories from everywhere, very large repertoire nowadays. And this idea of we can enter into that world of stories and enjoy those amazing colours and shapes. So across the curriculum, let's see what you think about that. John C. Edward, materials needed to build a tent, science, of course. And spatial skills in mathematics. So you're also talking about, they could actually look at designing that tent or designing their own tent or structure or building, perhaps. Is that what you're saying? And you mentioned, someone else says, PPSNC says we can integrate mathematics in measurement of a tent and all things. Definitely. Art integration, absolutely. I mean, storytelling is an art and it goes together with all art and creative subjects beautifully. Teaching history through storytelling. I mean, I don't know whether you're referring to any particular aspect of one of the stories that I told, but we could look at slavery, for example, and relate it to Fatima. For me, Fatima is also a story about migration. And in much of the world, more and more people are on the move, migrating for reasons of war, conflict, or poverty. And maybe it makes us more understanding and empathetic towards those who are forced to look for lives in new places. It's a very important aspect of telling stories like Fatima in the UK, where there's a lot of people who are intolerant of people who come from different cultures. Talking about values, well, storytelling is all about values. Interpersonal, intercultural understanding. Absolutely, I agree with you, Swati Singh. Basic rules of grammar. So students are learning grammar and vocabulary, even maybe unconsciously through storytelling, through a story like Plop with all that repetition. But even listening to a story like Fatima, they're learning a lot of maybe new vocabulary. I don't know whether it's masts, for example, in the context of the story, which makes that vocabulary memorable because it's fixed within the context of a memorable story. Pradita talking about geography learned through the various places that Fatima travelled. So there's so much opportunity for cross-curriculum projects. Fatima's story about women, and it's not by accident that I told you a story with a strong woman at its heart. So we can talk about gender roles, and isn't it fascinating? This is a very old story from the Middle East about a powerful woman. Thank you so much. Okay, well, I've got you know, like a final slide with some references and a final story, but maybe we should just spend 10 minutes on questions and answers. So I think I'm going to enlist the help of, if I may, can I ask Sudha Satish, can you help me with questions and answers? What did you notice any questions that came up?
Yeah, 1 minute. It was a truly wonderful session, Mr. Heathfield. It was amazing to learn that storytelling could be such a powerful pedagogical tool in every classroom. I'm sure the participants have plenty of questions. May I now request our Senior Vice President and Head of Publishing, Ms. Sudha Satish, to anchor the discussion and questions from the participants. Sudha?
Sure. Thank you, Radhika. And hello, Mr. Heathfield. That was a very enlightening session, and I thoroughly enjoyed the delightful stories.
Thank you very much.
But more pertinently, the session is very well timed as the NEP, or the National Education Policy, announced recently, advocates using storytelling as an effective tool in classroom teaching across all subjects. So this session couldn't have come at a better time for us.
Wonderful.
So since we don't have a lot of time left, I'll go straight to the questions. So here's the first one for you. I've heard it said that storytelling is the art of making the ordinary seem extraordinary. As a geography teacher, how can I bring in stories while teaching? Now there's another one from Mr. Suvajit on similar lines. Will I be able to use stories in a math class?
Yes, so thank you very much for those two questions. I think we just kind of started answering that question about both of those things in the last part of the session. And I think we saw that in your own answers. Just in the case of Fatima, that story, we can see an opportunity for looking at maths and science and the measurement of the tent, maybe students thinking about how they would design their own tent. And there are many stories like that. I mean, in my book, Storytelling with Our Students, I include some stories. There's one story called a Chinese story, a very ancient story about how to weigh an elephant. I don't know if you've come across that story, but all these, the emperor is given an elephant and it's too big, but he wants to know the weight of the elephant. And all of his advisors are trying to trying to solve the problem, and they're saying we'll have to kill the elephant and chop it up and weigh each piece. But it's the little boy, the emperor's a little boy, who actually says no, you know, and he comes up with the solution. Maybe I don't need to explain, I'm sure you can work it out. But equally with geography, I mean, the Fatima story, what a wonderful way to introduce this journey across the world and different traditions in different parts of the world. You know, I tell stories from every different region of the world, and again, in stories I publish, I didn't only write this book. In this book, integrating global issues in the creative English language classroom with reference to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Again, this is a free book, and here we're looking at global issues to do with the environment and to do with, you know, things that related to human geography, for example. And my stories there come from different cultures and can be used to introduce different projects or discussions about difficult issues. Yeah, by relating the story to where the story comes from geographically, we can look at geographical features within the story. So many of I tell some Australian creation myths, and we can link that to the landscape, the outback in Australia, the huge deserts, and the Aboriginal people and their lifestyles. There's huge scope for marrying traditional storytelling with different subject areas.
Thank you. So the next question, I think you again took that up partially. This is a question from Ms. Geeta. She asks, how important is it to be grammatically correct while telling the story? You know, so do we give emphasis on drama, and or is language equally important?
That's a really interesting question. I think it always depends on what our own aim is at that moment in our teaching. Generally speaking, I don't tend to teach grammar during a story. However, I might follow up a story by looking at some language that came up and was repeated. I'll give you one example. There's a story I tell, an English folktale called Lazy Jack, and if you want to, you can. I've got a very big YouTube channel. You can find me telling many stories to different groups and different ages, different playlists. But in Lazy Jack, there's a repeated phrase that the mother is always disappointed in Jack, and she says, next time put it in your pocket, next time carry it on your head, next time put it on your back, next time, yeah, and each time she's using an imperative each time. But when I'm working with learners with a slightly higher level of English, I change it and I use the structure should have. And then I change it so she says, not next time put it on your back, but you should have put it on your back. You should have carried it on your head. You should have put it in your pocket. So I've changed the story so it becomes a story where I introduce the structure should have done. However, my disclaimer is I don't usually teach grammar within a story, but we can certainly follow up by doing some grammar lesson. While I'm telling the story as a teacher, well, I think it's not so essential to be grammatically accurate. A lot of my work is about getting students to tell stories. And of course, when they're telling a story, if they're learners of English, there will be inaccuracy in use of vocabulary or grammar. But again, my focus will be on the fluency and the expressiveness. But perhaps but often then I'll ask them to work towards a performance. So initially they'll be retelling the story and having fun with it. But if we decide that that's also going to be a performance that they're going to do for a family coming into the school or at a festival, then we might then look at accuracy at the next stage. So then, because if they're going to perform, they want to be accurate. The children want to do it the best that they can. But initially with the storytelling, the focus is on fluency and confidence.
Yeah. Okay, so you spoke
I should try
about
to keep my answers shorter.
No. There are a few more questions, just two more we'll take. And there's one you had mentioned about repetition. So we have somebody writing in, Ms. Apurva Tegal, saying that how important is repetition for the lower classes, and how do we make it fun for them?
Thank you. Well, I think I've answered the question within the session. I think the fun is in telling the story, and stories are full of repetition. Folk tales are full of repetition. That's why they're so suitable. I mean, these stories evolved for teaching stories like Plop evolved for teaching young children language in their mother tongue. So they're so suitable for second language acquisition as well. They ran and they ran as fast as they could. They ran deeper into the wood. They're having fun and they're physicalizing it, and the repetition is linked in with the physical expression and the miming. It just is fun in the context of a well-told story, and not only with low levels. I mean, when I'm telling the story of Fatima to adults or even older people, sometimes I work with older people in care homes or in residential care in the UK. And I would tell the story of Fatima, and even those people, they want to join in with me, and they will say with me, everything is lost. Why is this happening to me? So it's not only for young learners, it means we're all telling the story together. We are all co-creators of the story. We're not passive listeners, we're telling it together.
Yeah, I think repetition helps you to be more participative.
Absolutely, and it's a very, very powerful and memorable way of learning.
Okay, I'll just take one more question. Are there any simple tools that can be used to create sound effects? You did it during the Fatima story session. So is there any simple tools that a teacher can use?
Well, you might imagine I've got a shelf up here full of instruments that I use. Can you see? This is my shelf of instruments. There's all sorts of percussive instruments there that I gathered from different cultures. There's a conch shell that I blow, and there's different pipes and bells and percussion. Some of them I bought I brought back when I went to Nepal a couple of years ago. So some traditional instruments that you would typically find in India or Nepal, and these add something to the story. There's some examples. Yes, I've got the thunder maker, and I can also change my voice. Help me! I can change the quality of my voice with that one. Or, at the edge of a beautiful clear lake, there lived a family of rabbits. That's my heart bell. I also use it for weddings, or they climbed higher and higher and higher up the mountain. So shakers. The challenge is sometimes when we're using these things online, that we have to find a balance between the sound and the voice. So we need to experiment to make sure they work effectively. But certainly I use a lot of percussion, and teachers and students often respond by saying, well, we loved those sounds. They made it very exciting and added to the story. So I do advocate using sound effects if you're so inclined.
Yes, I think so, because that will really liven up the session quite a bit. I think I have to take this one question. I'm sorry, I think we are a little over time, but still this one question, because this is something I empathize with completely.
Is there still going to be time for my final story, which is only 2 minutes long?
Okay, fine. This one says, I like to tell stories, but I feel I don't get the reaction I hope to get. How can I make my stories more dramatic? Because I empathize with this question completely, because I feel my stories always fall flat.
Well, I think there's a number of techniques, and again, there's a bit more information in the handout about techniques that we can use as storytellers. I think one of the things about, we say falling flat, often that's to do with the ending of a story. And it's very easy to begin a story. Once upon a time, or as I started Fatima with the Arabic traditional beginning, Kanya Makan Fikadim Zaman, or Il était une fois in French. These phrases are very powerful. Mukashi Mukashi in Japanese. But finishing a story, we have to know, we have to plan it. We need to rehearse how we finish the story so it has an impact.
Hello. Hello.
And so when people talk about stories falling flat, it's often because they haven't ended it clearly. So I recommend working on the ending, but there are many other techniques as well.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind next time I tell a story. Thank you so much, Mr. Heathfield. That was great, and it was a lovely session. And I'll pass on to Radhika now. Radhika, over to you.
David, you would like to just say the story now, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll tell the story. I'll tell the story now.
Yeah.
So I just, there's a couple of final things to. The C group is the Creativity for Change in Language Education group, which I'm a part of. We're a group of a very informal group. There's no cost to subscribe, of EFL or English language teaching professionals. And it's all about putting creativity at the heart of our practice. So if you want to know more, look up the creativity group. And final slide is just some links and publications. You could take a photograph of this on the screen. All of these links are also in the handout, which you can get afterwards and which will be explained. But right now, and there's also my email address here as well, which is also in the handout. Feel free to contact me by email. If you want to know what I'm up to, I can put you on my email list. And also you can friend me on Facebook if you're interested. It's David Heathfield. And as I mentioned, I've got a huge YouTube channel, so come and join and have a look and subscribe. So I'm going to finish sharing, and I'm going to tell you a final story for Teachers' Day tomorrow. Story. There was once a teacher who could answer any question. Whatever his students asked, this teacher could give a wise answer. He was so knowledgeable, so wise. But you know, the students got tired of this. They wanted a challenge. They wanted to find a question that this teacher couldn't answer. They wanted to trick him. So one very smart student, she caught a small bird in her hands. And she went to the teacher and she said, "Teacher, teacher, tell me, what I have in my hands, is it alive or is it dead?" The teacher somehow knew that she was holding a bird. He knew that if he said it was alive, she would crush the bird and show its dead body. He knew that if he said it was dead, she would open her hands and the bird would fly away alive and free. He looked at her. The answer, life or death, is in your hands. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to share stories with you from my little house in the southwest of England.
Thank you again, Mr. Heathfield, for agreeing to conduct a webinar on online storytelling. I wouldn't want to use the word actually webinar here. I would say, true to the topic, it was an engaging and immersive learning experience of storytelling as a craft. I'm sure the storytelling experience and the tips and strategies shared by you, along with the question and answer session, will help the teachers in humanizing and enhancing the teaching learning experience in the classroom in these challenging times of pandemic and change. As I can see from the chat box, the participants have found the webinar extremely useful. Hoping to see you back as a presenter again in One on Education. I would also like to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar and making it a success. We hope to see you again. Mr. Heathfield has shared a comprehensive handout on storytelling with all of you. The handout will be available on our teachers portal immediately after the webinar. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on the portal shortly. For those who have joined the webinar on the YouTube channel, you may get the resources by writing to customercare@orientblackswan.com. We would love to hear from you. Please do share your feedback with us. Good day and happy Teachers' Day from all of us at Orient Black Swan. Thank you.